let's start to get better at things which occur on a daily basis, because it's fine being able to reel off these principles, but unless you can enact them in real life, then it's just head knowledge, it's not heart knowledge. The innovation for me is really being able to find my own voice, really being able to ask the right questions, really throwing open the gates to anyone, really.
Welcome to The Conversation. In today's episode of Trailblazers, Johnny is speaking to Eoin Walker, podcast host and former paramedic with London's Air Ambulance. We hope you enjoy the conversation. Be sure to subscribe and, of course, follow us on social.
Eoin, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here today. For our viewers or listeners who may not know who you are, give us a little bit of background on yourself.
Thanks, Johnny. My name's Eoin Walker. I am a paramedic by trade of 20 years. I currently live in Germany and work for Airbus helicopters in the HEMS segment, so the helicopter emergency medical segment. But my background is 20 years as a paramedic.
Amazing. So what inspired the journey into becoming a paramedic?
Yeah, good question. So I kind of just wanted to be A, useful, and B, care for people. And it sounds quite basic, but actually it's probably quite fundamental. And became an auxiliary nurse, so a nurse's aide, and I really enjoyed it actually. And then it was a short pivot from there into being a paramedic, but a long journey of sort of training and education and then practice.
I know you also do a lot of work with World Extreme Medicine, including running their podcast. How did you come across them? How has your journey been with them, and shed a little bit of light on that? Yeah,
thanks, Johnny. So I think some things happen to you. You affect life, but life also affects you, and in a good way and in a challenging way sometimes. But so I met World Extreme Medicine in 2012. So what would that be? 12 years ago now. And I met the then medical director whilst I was working on London HEMS, so the London Helicopter Emergency Service. And she said, "Come and teach for us. Come do some work for us." And the rest is history, really. I think my first course was in Costa Rica, of all places, as an expedition medic, because I'd done quite a lot of expeditions in the past. And we went from there. And then I progressively taught more and more for World Extreme Medicine, became the pre-hospital lead, started to attend conferences and talk on more of a national and international level, and then pivoted into the digital lead role. So now I lead a team of hosts for the World Extreme Medicine podcast, amongst a couple of other podcasts that I run.
Amazing. I mean, with the pre-hospital lead role, what sort of skills, tools and bits and pieces were you teaching people?
Yeah, so it was really around adaptation of in-hospital principles and or trauma first aid to pre-hospital care. So it was around making sure that the people are safe in their practice, but also giving them trauma tools, trauma mindsets, and a lot of non-technical skills, a lot of human factors training, and sort of starting to bring people into high fidelity simulation, and allowing them to be in what we would call a sort of a high fidelity training simulation, whereby it's quite immersive, and then pulling out the debriefing and the lessons learned on the back of that. So that was really where I learned and grew a passion for education on that basis.
Yeah, I mean, one of the questions that naturally falls off that, I think, is with the skills and the resources that you have in a hospital setting, or kind of like a first world hospital setting, let's just say, it may not entirely prepare you for all of the situations that you might come across or find yourself involved in another situation. What are some of the more practical things that you think you've learned through the various different expeditions, journeys, and all of that sort of stuff that you've done with WEM, that you've then taken those lessons and learnings back into other medicine settings?
Yeah, good question, Johnny. I think one of the main issues really in life is you may or may not have to bump up against medical emergencies in life, but you will on a daily and weekly basis have team dynamics and human factors. So everyone gets fatigued, everyone has issues around team dynamics, individual personal dynamics, individual human factors, around memory retention, around skill acquisition, skill performance. And then so the real kind of revelation is that focusing on things which might we call halo, so high acuity, low occurrence issues or skills, but also what we call hey-ho, so high acuity, high occurrence, so things that occur all the time. Let's start to get better at things which occur on a daily basis, because essentially that's what sort of the fundamental components of every day is looking like. How do we affect team dynamics? How do we affect team dynamics before they affect us? So how do we become less reactionary and more proactive in affecting team dynamics? How do we acknowledge our state of fatigue, our state of poor short-term memory retention? How do we translate information to other people? How do we then also affirm others in their roles and get good team working? And a lot of these principles, Johnny, actually reach way outside of expedition medicine. They're some of the fundamental components of non-technical skill working, which can affect any large multinational, any small business, any education, any area of life, really.
Yeah. I mean, that really occurred to me as you were talking about how we manage people's stress levels, how we manage kind of like the communication that in those heightened states, communicating to someone in a medical setting, obviously, when you're trying to save someone's life, or you're trying to triage a patient, that's a very high pressure, intense situation. But equally, in the corporate world, you could be negotiating a deal for, buying or selling a business or something like that. And again, there's a lot of factors that come into it. So there's so much applicability in those situations. What are some of the tools and tactics that you try to employ in those high pressure situations that you've picked up over the years?
Yeah, good question. So one of it's mirroring and matching. So what you want to do is kind of mirror and match in a way that you can that people can sense this kind of reciprocity, that you are attentive, and that you are starting to build rapport subconsciously. Another one would be the power of agreement. So agreeing on things which actually are probably a little bit more static, such as, yeah, this trek has been really hard, or with this work, the work principles, or indeed this project is a really difficult one, or a really challenging one, or is actually quite complex. Might be something about the weather. It might be something else, but 3 or 4 agreements, and then the 5th agreement is your agreement, is something you bring in. It's a lot harder to disagree with me when you've agreed with me 3 or 4 times already.
Interesting.
So yeah, so building up a certain level of conscious and subconscious rapport with someone, and then the 4th or 5th agreement is on my terms, but also just the general principles of de-escalation. So pivoting towards active listening. So actually, you're not pushing your agenda. There can't be reciprocity and de-escalation without fundamental listening and knowing what your issues are. So it's that pivot. It's showing that you're listening. So actually pulling information out of what you've said, because that shows you that I've listened. It's then making these mutual agreements, which actually we do fundamentally agree on, and then bringing my point across, which hopefully it's an altruistic one. It's not one of malevolence. It's not one of sort of Machiavellian working. But it's bringing people into a place where it's functional and effective. And again, hopefully, it's not got to that place where it's dysfunctional. If it has, then there's some quick de-escalation techniques we use. But it's hopefully bringing forward to this sense of proactive functionality and articulating problems way before they occur.
We'll get back to the episode in just 1 minute, but right now I want to tell you about Spark. When we launched our own podcast, we realised firsthand just how expensive it is to get the right studio space, the right kit, and then edit your footage afterwards. That's why we created Spark, so that any content creator can get started on their content creation journey without the need to buy their own kit or hire an expensive studio space. The studio you can see right now is actually the same one that we use for our Trailblazers podcast. And right now, you can get an exclusive 10% off your first 1 hour booking slot by using code SPARK10 when you submit your inquiry at sparkcreative.london. That's SPARK10 when you submit your inquiry at sparkcreative.london. And now, back to the episode.
There's a lot of parallels that I'm hearing. Do you know the Chris Voss book, Never Split the Difference?
Yeah, I do. As an ex-negotiator, as an ex-hostage negotiator.
Exactly. Yeah. It's and it was really funny. I mean, that whole thing about, 4 agreements, and then you have that fifth one, because it's so much harder. We've built common ground. We clearly have some stuff in common here, so it's much harder to kind of disagree. That's really, really interesting, and all the other parts around that mirroring and matching. I'm going to have to rewatch that myself. I probably need to learn some of those skills a little bit more. How did the podcast come about as well? So I obviously, I know that the journey that you've been on with WEM, presumably you wanted to shine a light on some of these amazing people that you're meeting.
Yeah, indeed. So I run 3 podcasts. I run something called a pre-hospital care podcast, which is a clinical podcast for paramedics, doctors, nurses, and we've got just under 250,000 listeners on that one. I run the Restore podcast, which is more of a mental health and wellness, non-clinical conversations, inspiring individuals which have overcome adversity. And then I run the World Extreme Medicine podcast with the team of hosts there. So I run 2 teams. One we've got on the pre-hospital care podcast, we've got a team of 5, and then the World Extreme Medicine podcast is a team of 8. And again, it's just around, to be honest, it's falling forward, Johnny. It's learning your lessons as you go. It's learning what works and what doesn't work. It's learning how to optimize for audio, optimize for video, but it's also learning how to ask the right questions.
Yeah.
And fundamentally tap into stories. So storytelling is key. And then also, as you know, with content creation, it's about appealing to people. So there's not only inspirational stories, but there's some educational leverage there as well. So there's utility in education, but there's also a good story to be told. And the true master of sort of podcast hosting is being able to weave an educational lesson or lessons into a story, through a story. Yeah. So you're keeping the listenership with you. They're tracking you as you go, and you're pulling out lessons learned and pearls of wisdom along that story.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely amazing. And I've heard some of the episodes that you've done with folks like Jeremy and other people as well. So what are some of the standouts for you from the stories that you've heard and those stories that you've been able to weave through that work?
Yeah, good question. I think me and you both truly value vulnerability. So actual, real, honest, gritty stories. So I just interviewed a guy called Jay Baldwin, who's a double amputee, had his legs, he stepped on an IED, improvised explosive device in Afghanistan when he was 26. And he's got above knee amputations, retrained as a personal trainer, had it, super challenging rehabilitation, spoke really honestly, gave me his real honest reflection, and that was really powerful because life is hard on a daily basis. Yeah. And I'd actually rather hear that than and because I think people can identify with that rather than maybe a lot of fakery and other things that you get on certain platforms or certain social media outlets. I completely
agree.
Yeah. So that was profound. But what I really resonate with, I interviewed Foxy, so Jason Fox, one of the ex-SAS soldiers and or SBS, and again, really vulnerable. But again, Johnny, one of the principles is that you have to give to get. So the principle of reciprocity is that you have to model to others what you want to see back from them. So I can't just get all the pearls of wisdom and all the vulnerability out of you without actually giving you something in return, or initially giving you something. So as a host, giving you some semblance of vulnerability from myself to help you open up to me. And so that's where I feel there's real leverage in a conversation, is when we're both being vulnerable, both being open, and actually just both being honest about life struggles and maybe how we combat those, because our time is too short just to hear fakery and kind of surface level conversation.
Yeah, I mean, the most compelling stories are the ones that are the truth, and there is no denying, as you said, that life is hard. And for that 26-year-old who has lost his legs above the knee, that is something that you're going to have to accept, that it's not going to be sunshine and rainbows every day. And then to go one step further and become a personal trainer, to choose another physically active role, a job, a way to make your living and earn a crust. those stories are just the ones that inspire and stay with us. It's not about going to some, far-flung hotel in the most luxurious resort and all of that sort of stuff. What are you going to learn from that? You're going to learn how to sit on a beach and sip a Mai Tai. You're not going to learn about resilience. You're not going to learn about, what it takes to get out of bed and do your physio exercises when you just want to wallow in your own self-pity. Those are things that I think offer guidance and principles for a way through that is a meaningful life. And it's one of the things that I've been very lucky with the content that we're creating. And it sounds very similar to what you get to experience with the people that you're interviewing, where there are so many lessons that you learn and conversations that you have that you just genuinely find truly inspiring. That I love being the dumbest guy in the room, is what I like to say. It's my favorite place to be. It's uncomfortable at times because you feel like you're talking to people that are way, way smarter, but you learn so much. And it's through that learning that you get to be able to hopefully apply some of those principles, lessons, and better what your outcomes might be, and handle situations, that, when we were talking about the principles that you apply and the tactics that you apply in those high pressure situations, that's something that's actionable information that I'm going to learn, I'm going to take away, I'm going to review, and I'm going to do something with. And that's such a wonderful gift to be able to receive. And hopefully at some point, when I've accumulated enough knowledge, maybe distill that down into some wisdom that I can share.
Yeah, no, indeed. Absolutely. I totally agree. And one of the things is, like you said, reframing your own perspective, which is powerful. So, I generally find a lot of these social media platforms take away from you because comparison is a thief of joy, but actually not comparing yourself, but or listening to someone else's struggles who's maybe a lot, had it a lot harder than you and me. And actually, like you said, kind of taking the lessons learned from that, but taking a perspective where it's like, wow, these guys are struggling. There's so much more on their plate, yet they choose to get up and overcome every day. And that positive reframing is again, and that's why I started the Restore podcast. I want to have restorative conversations, and I do over all the podcast platforms, actually, just restorative conversations which help reframe and help people just understand some of the good things which are going on in our lives, and be thankful. Practice gratitude, understand that a lot of what we have is privilege, a lot of what I have is privilege, and then just reframe constantly, because I think it's so easy just to get this mindset of kind of comparison and of someone else has got more than me, and it's constantly trying to reframe that.
Yeah, there's a difference between having what you want and wanting what you have.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's a huge mindset shift. And if we were in those positions, I think a lot of people would find themselves a lot happier and a lot more content and appreciative and grateful, as you say, of the things that are amazing in their lives. So talk to me about some of the challenges that you've faced as well. So some of the situations that you've been in, where they're the most challenging situations, you've applied some of this stuff that you've learned. As an exercise in sharing some personal growth.
Yeah. So, 20 years as a paramedic, I've got lots of stories and lots of life-changing incidents from a patient perspective. But I think from my personal journey, one of my biggest growth experiences was actually a 5-day adventure race in Scottish Highlands, which was in 2022. And over that 5 days, we'd be racing for 23 hours, get an hour to sleep, and then back racing again. So it was kayaking, it was mountain biking, it was hiking / running, 400 and I want to say 450 kilometers. But it was like over the Highlands. We started in Oban, ended in Oban, but then went to pretty much all the sort of westerly islands, and then back to the mainland. It was a team of 4, sleep deprived, really pushing myself to the physical limits, paddling out into the ocean for ocean paddles, cycling 80, 90, 100 kilometers a day through the night, through the day. And, I've been fatigued as a paramedic. Through day shifts, late shifts, night shifts, but this was just something different. And seeing how I move, how I react after 5 days of true sleep deprivation, and looking at the team dynamics and where I can still rise to the challenge, you tweak team dynamics, alter them for the better, objectively see my own pain because I had no skin left on my feet. I had, half of my back was in bits. I had, tendinitis. I had sunburn. I had, all these things. It was truly testing. But I did a lot of growing through that time, and also just bringing the team along with you in that. And again, because it's fine being able to reel off these principles, but unless you can act them, enact them in real life, then it's just head knowledge. It's not heart knowledge.
100%.
And it is really about being able to practice them in reality.
Well, I think that's one of the most crucial parts of it, and assuming in that race situation that you don't finish the race until your last team member finishes the race, right? So you have to collaborate, communicate, and operate in a situation where you're sleep deprived. You've got to make decisions quickly on the fly, and you've got to do that for the collective good. You've got to work together as a team to achieve your objective, and again, apply those principles that you learn. And I think that there's so much in that, one of the things that I really would encourage a lot of people to do is to actually put themselves in those, maybe not quite as extreme as that, mate, but some of those situations where they're going to get to apply some of the things that they've learned. Actually, that's a really good question to think of with other people that are maybe going through the early parts of their training in medical professions. Is there any way that you think that they can get involved, or how can they get involved with situations like this where they can apply some of those intense high pressure skills and, maybe expand and broaden their horizons?
Yeah, indeed. So World Extreme Medicine actually run a number of courses which test human factors and team dynamics. So I would counsel people to go to the World Extreme Medicine website, because what we do is sometimes micro expeditions in various places around the world, and so there's a lot of utility in just putting yourself on an expedition, in a safe space with a faculty, and it's food's provided, and you can start to subject yourself to some quite extreme conditions, actually, but in a safe way. So that would be a great pivot. And then I think another one really for those that are looking to get out and hike more, or there's lots of different kind of half marathons and adventure races you can do, which are just a little bit way easier actually than a 5-day kind of ultra marathon / adventure race. And it's doing bite-sized things first, I think.
Yeah.
Because if you rush into an extrememly intense adventure race, or indeed an extremely intense expedition, then the chances of becoming overwhelmed are super high.
Yeah, of course. You don't want to throw yourself into an ultra marathon when you've barely done a 5K. Yeah, probably not the best of ideas.
Yeah, exactly.
One of the other questions that I was going to ask you was around, obviously, one of the areas that we cover is innovations and things like that maybe have been kind of game changers in delivery of medicine and stuff like that. Through the time that you've been, delivering care and all of that sort of stuff, what are some of the greatest innovations that you've seen in health situations and challenging health situations that have really been inspiring and kind of helped change the game for you?
Yeah, from an innovation perspective, I think just the evolution of communication devices, satellite phones, and also the way we manage bleeding as paramedics has absolutely changed with these hemostatic devices, which have been fantastic. There's also been innovation in the way we manage patients, so back to specialisms, to various specialisms. So if you have a heart attack, you go to a heart attack center. If you're having a stroke, you go to a stroke center, and if you're having major trauma, you go to a major trauma center. So that's pulled through from military data and military experience. So that's been a real game changer from a paramedic perspective. I think from an individual perspective, what the innovation for me has been within healthcare has been sort of the digital space and technology about being able to do something like this, both as a paramedic, so you can do online consultation and start to counsel patients before the medical team get to see them, but also just the simple passage of, personally, innovation of connecting to a wider network for me. So across 3 different podcast platforms, global audience, global guests. It's this sense of new power versus old power, Johnny. So old power, is in the publishing houses. Only certain people had access to large amounts of other people. It always was with the broadsheet newspapers or the publishing houses. But now it's that we've seen the democratization of information and of publishing. So anyone can be a content producer and content creator. Anyone can offer high value content. And so the new power really is the democratization of being able to publish and being able to access a global audience, but also access a global number of guests. And so the innovation for me is really being able to find my own voice, really being able to ask the right questions, really throwing open the gates to anyone, really. So who do I want to speak to? Who can add value to an audience which I now have the privilege of speaking to? So the innovation of technology such as this even has really been a game changer for enabling me and you to have some of these conversations with a wider global audience, which probably wasn't there 5 or 10 years ago.
100%. And it's one of the things that I'm eternally grateful for, having conversations like this, having conversations, with individuals who are doing some of the most incredible work, getting to talk to individuals who are, pioneering telehealth in remote areas of Africa through solar powered telephone masts so that they can patch in doctors working in Johns Hopkins University to consult with surgical procedures. That sort of stuff, you wouldn't be able to talk to those people or even reach them or even know who they probably were 5-10 years ago. But they were there. And now it just provides us with an amazing platform to actually have those conversations. But also, I don't know about you, but it feels almost like a responsibility to be able to actually shine a light on those individuals, to share some of those insights and those stories and progress their work and their mission.
Yeah, absolutely, Johnny, absolutely. And so the democratization of this medium is powerful, because what we're seeing now is that the spoken word is almost becoming more ubiquitous and powerful than the written word. And the written word will always be there, but actually people are consuming information in a different way. They're driving, listening to podcasts, they're in the gym, they're cooking, they're cleaning, they're doing whatever they're doing, they're traveling, consuming information. So what we're doing now is we're doing a podcast and or video, but people can do other things at the same time as consuming information. And that principle alone is powerful, because the written word, you are committed to a book, you're committed to an interface, your unilateral attention is on one thing, and you cannot therefore do other things as a consequence. But so this really has enabled people to do 2 things at once. They can passively absorb information whilst traveling, whilst doing another task.
Yeah. And it's really funny, actually, as you were describing the fact that we're transitioning away perhaps from so much of the written word, it does. And then something that you touched on earlier is the ability of really good hosts or guests to weave stories together. It's really funny how even in this heightened digital age, we're actually cycling back to the ways in which we transferred knowledge from way back when, before there was even written word. We were telling stories to our kids. We were telling stories around a campfire about, okay, you want to eat this berry and this, avoid this plant or avoid this animal, and this is how we grow these things. And it's a really beautiful, almost, sometimes you can get a little bit lost in the quagmire of kind of, oh, digital's so bad. But actually, if you think about it, it's almost returning us back to the roots of great storytelling and how we weave those together and spread knowledge. Owen, what's next for you? What are you working on next?
Yeah, so good question, actually. So there's continuity of these 3 podcasts. I am just acclimatizing to living in Germany. I've only been here 6 months, so learning German at the moment. So that's always a challenge. Just normalization from a new norm, I think, for me. Working for Airbus helicopters, which is fantastic and gives me opportunity to travel the world and indeed engage with some fantastic people. But there's a lot of new things, and I think for me now it's going to be consolidation of my life here in Europe, and I think in a way consolidation of workflow, so that it's just there's some kind of new normal, but getting used to that, because the fundamental tendency is to take new things on, new things, but sometimes it's about consolidation, and as much as it is about taking new things on.
Absolutely. Oh, and I love these conversations, man. If people want to find you, people want to engage with you, where can they go? Where can they find you?
Yeah, thanks, Johnny. So I'm on social media, just Facebook. So Eoin Walker, Eoin Walker, and I push my podcast out there. You can check out Restore with Eoin Walker, which is one of my podcasts. The Pre-Hospital Care podcast is another one, and then the World Extreme Medicine podcast is also where you can find me. So just type that into the internet or any podcast platform, and I'll pop up.
Amazing stuff, man. I really appreciate you. Thank you for your time today. And I highly encourage people to check you out.
Thanks, Johnny.